The drop shuttle tore through the thick green clouds of Araris 3, shaking violently as it descended through layers of storm and static. Lightning flared across the sky, illuminating the massive canopy below like veins of light running through a living ocean. The cadets inside held onto their seats, their harnesses creaking as turbulence slammed the vessel sideways. The pilot's voice came through the intercom, flat and calm despite the chaos. "Welcome to Araris 3. Humidity, 98%. Rainfall, constant. Try not to drown." The hatch opened, and a flood of humid air hit the group like a living creature. The scent was overpowering. Wet soil, rotting leaves, and something faintly metallic, as if the entire planet sweated iron. Logan Reed stepped out last. The human cadet was tall, lean, and quiet, his gray uniform already sticking to his skin from the moisture. Around him, members of the Galactic Academy's mixed species class were trying to adapt. The reptilian Tharkians hissed in discomfort as condensation gathered on their scales. The Avrian twins, creatures with delicate feathered membranes, folded their wings tight to protect them from the rain. The methane-breathing Driths adjusted their mask filters, coughing at the organic heaviness of the air. The rain came down harder, thick as poured oil, drenching everyone within seconds. The instructors had chosen this planet as part of the Survival in Uncontrolled Environments course, a cruel test meant to strip every cadet of comfort, technology, and routine. Each team received only standard-issue tents, ration packs, a few filtration units, and no contact with orbits until the final signal in 12 rotations. Logan had seen worse storms back on Earth, but Araris 3 felt alive in a different way. The trees were enormous, roots as thick as transport pods, branches that vanished into clouds. Every surface glistened with moisture, every noise echoed with distance. It was as if the jungle wanted to be heard. The class spread out to set up camp. The instructor's voice transmitted from the sky before the shuttle departed. No shelters above ground. All habitats must remain within 100 meters of your assigned landing zone. You are being monitored for teamwork, resource use, and structural stability. Failure will be recorded. Then the shuttle was gone, vanishing into gray mist. The sound of its engines faded into the endless hiss of rainfall. The silence that followed felt heavier than the air itself. By nightfall, the first tents were already sinking. The ground was deceptive. What looked like firm soil was actually a floating layer of organic sludge above deeper mud. Stakes pulled loose, ropes snapped, and the synthetic fabric tore under its own soaked weight. The cadets worked with panic rather than coordination. Arguments broke out in at least 4 languages. A Drith accused an Avrian of stealing his ration heater. A Tharkian threatened to strike anyone who touched his gear again. Logan watched from under the half-collapsed roof of his own tent, rainwater dripping down his neck, and stayed quiet. Sleep was impossible. The rain never stopped. It came in waves, sometimes soft and rhythmic, sometimes hammering with such violence that the ground quivered. In the darkness, phosphorescent insects crawled over tent seams, drawn to body heat. One by one, the cadets learned what the instructors already knew. Fabric and rope meant nothing on Araris 3. This planet devoured anything left on the ground. By the second morning, the camp was a swamp of broken shelters, soggy rations, and bitter exhaustion. Logan sat by a puddle, his boots half submerged, staring at the jungle's edge. He noticed that the water wasn't pooling randomly. It was following invisible patterns, small channels carved naturally between massive tree roots. The forest floor wasn't flat at all. It was shaped like a living system. Water drained along certain paths, disappearing under the roots and reappearing far away as mist. The trees seemed to breathe it, absorb it, and release it again. He began to wonder if the forest itself might offer protection rather than hostility. Nearby, an insectoid cadet named Sareth shouted in frustration as his shelter collapsed for the 3rd time. "This planet rejects logic," he cried, his voice sharp like metal scraping stone. "The water ignores elevation." Logan looked up at the towering trees and quietly disagreed. The water wasn't ignoring elevation. It was following design, just not the kind any of them were trained to read. By midday, some cadets were already requesting evacuation. Their devices blinked with red warnings: humidity-destroying circuitry, rations molding within sealed packs, sleeping quarters sinking beyond repair. The air smelled of rot. The temperature never dropped, not even at night. Logan spent the third day walking the perimeter, ignoring the mud that pulled at his boots. He examined the trees closely. Their bark was layered like armor plates, with natural grooves that guided water downward. High above, he saw long vines that looked like cables, connecting branches between different trees, forming a dense web of support. If something could live up there, it would be dry. That night, he climbed. The first few meters were easy, but soon the bark turned slick, forcing him to wedge his boots into crevices. He used a discarded cable to pull himself higher. The others below called him insane. "You'll slip and die," shouted an Avrian, wings dripping as she tried to fan them dry. Logan didn't answer. The higher he climbed, the quieter the rain sounded. The air grew cooler, fresher, and the wind carried the scent of flowers instead of rot. When he reached the first major branch, he found something extraordinary. The branch was broad enough to walk across, and its surface was dry. Above him, rain fell in sheets, but the leaves caught most of it, diverting water down through the vines. It was a living roof. He sat there, breathing hard, soaked but exhilarated. For the first time since landing, he could see light, faint beams breaking through the storm clouds, glimmering off the canopy. The sight reminded him of early mornings on Earth, when his father used to take him camping in the mountains. Back then, they had built tree platforms to avoid floods, cooking over wet fires and learning patience through failure. His father had always said, "The trick to surviving isn't fighting nature, it's convincing it to let you stay." When Logan climbed back down, the camp was chaos again. The cadets had spent the night trying to reinforce their tents with metal poles and heat seals, only for everything to collapse once more. Exhaustion showed on every face. One of the Tharkians, scales dulled from dehydration, muttered, "This planet wants us dead." Logan disagreed, quietly but firmly. "No," he said, wringing rainwater from his sleeves. "It wants us to climb." No one listened. The next day brought the worst storm yet. Wind ripped through the clearing, hurling debris into the air. Tents vanished, snapped in half, or buried under falling branches. The Avrian twins lost their wing membranes to the force of the rain, their screams echoing through the storm. Several cadets retreated toward the thickest roots, trying to find stability in the mud. Logan held on to one of the tree trunks and felt the difference. The roots didn't shift, even under the pounding storm. He realized that the ground betrayed them, but the trees never moved. They had survived centuries of storms exactly like this. When the wind finally eased, only fragments of the camp remained. Water pooled waist-deep in places. The instructor's drones recorded every movement from above, waiting to see which cadets would adapt. Logan stood alone in the ruined camp and looked at the forest canopy again. He felt a quiet certainty settle inside him. If the trees had survived every storm, then that was where survival belonged. He returned to the largest trunk he had climbed before, examining its roots. They twisted outward like giant anchors, each one capable of supporting immense weight. He ran his hand across the bark, noticing that the tree's living tissue responded with faint vibration, as if acknowledging his touch. The idea began to form. Not a tent, not a shelter on the ground, but something above, among the living wood, using the forest itself as framework. A home suspended in air, safe from mud, heat, and despair. By nightfall, while the others tried once more to patch their failing shelters, Logan worked silently under the rain. He gathered leftover cables, discarded poles, and lengths of vine that glowed faintly in the dark. He tied knots the way his father had taught him, double-wrapped for strength, using roots as anchors. He planned not for hours, but for permanence. The rain hissed around him like white noise, but his mind was clear. For the first time on Araris 3, the human wasn't fighting the storm. He was learning to live with it. As darkness swallowed the jungle, his silhouette moved between flashes of lightning, a man building upward while everyone else sank lower. The planet's voice was loud that night, rain and thunder merging into one endless roar. But somewhere above the swamp, one human had begun the quiet work of changing the rules. By the next morning, the rain had eased into a slow, steady rhythm, less like a punishment and more like a heartbeat. The cadets were quiet. No one had the energy left for arguing. Mud covered everything, their uniforms, their tools. Even the small drones meant to assist with surveying had sunk and stopped blinking during the night. The entire camp looked like the aftermath of a lost battle. Logan Reed woke before sunrise, his tent long gone, replaced by a crude tarp stretched between two roots. The air was heavy with steam, rising from the soaked ground as the first pale light filtered through the canopy. He stood for a moment, listening. The forest never stopped breathing. The hiss of rain, the groan of wood, and the whisper of unseen creatures created a kind of rhythm that almost sounded alive. He was hungry, but more than that, he was tired of failing. Every instinct in him screamed that fighting the ground was pointless. He had learned the same lesson during his early years in Alaska, when storms would flatten entire camps overnight. His father had taught him to watch what nature built for itself and to copy its design. He remembered those long winters when they had built raised wooden platforms over frozen lakes to keep their supplies dry. It was the same principle here, only the scale was different. He tightened his soaked jacket and started toward the massive tree he had climbed the previous night. The others were too exhausted to notice him leave. A few were still attempting to reconstruct their shelters, hammering metal stakes into mud as if doing so would change the planet's will. One of the reptilian cadets glared at him, his yellow eyes narrow. "Going to climb again, human?" he hissed with disdain. Logan ignored him. There was no point explaining. Words wouldn't survive this place. Only results would. When he reached the base of the tree, the world changed. The air here felt cooler, calmer. Water drained away in thin streams between the roots, leaving small pockets of dry soil. The bark shimmered faintly with natural oils, repelling the moisture that swallowed everything else. He ran his fingers over the grooves, tracing the lines where water flowed downward, perfectly channeled like pipes. The structure was natural engineering, the kind of balance no machine could imitate. He took out his survival knife, one of the few tools still intact, and cut a length of vine that had been dangling near the base. The vine was strong, flexible, and oddly warm to the touch. When he pulled on it, the fibers resisted, but didn't snap. He smiled faintly. He had used materials like this before, not from alien trees, of course, but similar enough to understand. He began gathering what he could: vines, fallen branches, metallic debris left from broken drones, and remnants of tent poles. Piece by piece, he carried everything up into the canopy. The climb took time, and more than once he slipped, his boots scraping against the slick bark. His muscles ached, but the higher he went, the lighter the air felt. By midday, he had reached the first platform he had roughly mapped out in his head, a natural fork in the branches where two enormous limbs met at an angle wide enough to hold a person. He tied his vines in tight knots, securing them around the intersection. The strength surprised him. When he leaned his weight onto one of the ropes, it didn't budge. He began weaving the vines together, forming a crude net. It was slow, repetitive work, but with every knot, he felt a strange calm take over. The sound of the rain above became muffled, distant, like a curtain between worlds. Down below, cadets still cursed the mud. Up here, he was in another realm entirely. When the sun broke through for a moment, shafts of gold light pierced the canopy, revealing the texture of the leaves, thick, waxy, and broad enough to deflect heavy water. Logan reached up and cut several with his knife. The sap that oozed out was sticky, resin-like, and quickly hardened when it met the air. He tested it, pressing his thumb against it, and realized it could seal gaps in his structure. He began to use it as adhesive, patching the spaces in his woven base, layering leaves to form a waterproof surface. The result was rough, but functional. He sat back on his heels and let out a long breath. It was small, fragile, but it was a beginning. Later that afternoon, one of the Avrian twins flew close enough to see what he was doing. She hovered uncertainly, her feathers glistening in the dim light. "You're wasting your energy," she called out, her voice hoarse. "The instructor said ground shelters only. You'll fail the assignment if you go against orders." Logan didn't look at her. "We already failed," he said simply. "You can stay in the mud if you want. I'm staying dry." The Avrian hesitated for a moment before gliding back down. He didn't expect her to return. By nightfall, Logan had finished the first prototype of his elevated shelter, a platform of woven vines anchored between three massive branches, roofed with thick leaves sealed by sap. It wasn't beautiful, but it held. He climbed onto it cautiously, feeling it shift slightly under his weight, then steady itself. The tree groaned as if acknowledging him. He lay down, staring through the gaps in the leaves. The storm returned shortly after, sheets of rain slamming against the canopy. Yet up here, most of it never reached him. Only a fine mist drifted through, cooling the air. The sound of rain on leaves became rhythmic, almost peaceful. For the first time since landing, he felt something close to comfort. The next morning, the camp below was in ruin again. Half the cadets had given up on repairing their tents. A few were trying to sleep under tarps or inside broken containers. Logan climbed down to scavenge more materials. The sight that greeted him confirmed what he already knew. No one was going to last long like this. He started collecting pieces of their failed shelters without asking, dragging broken poles, wire mesh, and fragments of solar fabric back up to his new base. He stripped insulation from the wires, twisting them into braces. He repurposed a fallen ration crate as flooring. It didn't take long for curiosity to overcome skepticism. Around midday, one of the Tharkians followed him up the trunk, his claws digging into the bark. "You built this?" the alien asked, peering around with wide eyes. "You actually sleep here?" Logan nodded, tightening a vine with both hands. "You can too, if you help me make it bigger." The Tharkian snorted, but didn't leave. He began testing the ropes, pulling on them experimentally. When they held, he grunted approval and started assisting without another word. By the end of the day, they had added 2 more platforms, connecting them with woven vine bridges. Logan taught the Tharkian how to braid the vines together for tension, showing him the same knots used in old Earth survival schools. The process fascinated the alien, whose culture had relied entirely on technology for centuries. "You humans," he muttered, half admiring, half baffled. "You keep solving problems that should not exist." Logan smiled faintly. "That's what makes it fun." When the rain came again that evening, the small treehouse held firm. The Tharkian climbed back down, muttering that he would return with others. Logan remained, adjusting the tension in the ropes and strengthening the corners with resin. The more he built, the more he realized that the forest was cooperating. The vines seemed to grow tighter overnight, as if responding to pressure. The leaves hardened when exposed to sunlight, sealing gaps naturally. The materials didn't resist his work. They adapted with him. It was as though the forest approved. Days passed in a rhythm that became strangely human. Logan would climb down at dawn to collect materials, scavenge food, and return by midday to build. The others watched from below, some with ridicule, some with growing interest. He barely noticed their whispers anymore. The platform was now large enough to hold 3 people. He began building a simple pulley system using rope and a bent pole from a broken drone arm, allowing him to lift heavier objects. He hung his damp clothes near the canopy, where the air currents dried them faster. Slowly, the place began to feel less like a survival experiment and more like a refuge. By the 5th day, the first volunteer arrived, a young Avrian, the same one who had mocked him before. She approached cautiously, her wings still torn from the earlier storm. "I can't stand the ground anymore," she said quietly. "Teach me how to stay up there." Logan nodded without hesitation. "Grab a vine and climb. Use your legs more than your arms. Keep 3 points of contact." She followed his instructions, and when she reached the first platform, her expression changed completely. She stared out over the endless green expanse below, the mist swirling between branches like rivers of light. For the first time, she smiled. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Logan just nodded. "It's home now." That night, the rain came again, but this time the sounds of misery from below were faint. Up above, 2 cadets sat together, dry, warm, and alive. Logan brewed a crude drink using boiled water and crushed seeds he had found drying inside the bark. Bitter, earthy, but strangely comforting. The Avrian sipped it carefully, her eyes wide. "It tastes alive," she said. "That's the point," he replied. "Everything here is." As dawn broke, sunlight cut through the mist and struck the branches, casting golden reflections across the wet leaves. Below, the camp was silent. Above, the first signs of a real structure took shape, a home in the sky, born from one man's stubborn refusal to sink. Logan sat at the edge of the platform, watching the horizon where clouds drifted like slow waves, and felt something he hadn't felt since leaving Earth: belonging. The idea that had started as frustration had become something else entirely. It wasn't just about surviving the storm anymore. It was about proving that comfort, warmth, and even beauty could exist anywhere if one was willing to build it. The next few days changed everything. What had started as one man's experiment was slowly transforming into a living structure above the forest. The storms continued without mercy, but the higher the cadets built, the less the planet punished them. The treehouse no longer felt like rebellion against the rules. It was evolution. Logan Reed worked from dawn until the light faded, his muscles raw and his hands cut from the rough vines. But he didn't stop. Each new addition meant another person could escape the mud, another life preserved from the planet's cruelty. The forest had become his partner, and he treated it with the respect one would give an ancient ally. The Avrian cadet, who had joined him first, proved invaluable. Her name was Surreal, and though her wings were too damaged for flight, she had an uncanny sense of balance that allowed her to move swiftly across the branches. Together, they reinforced the main platforms and began connecting them into a single network. Sorrel gathered vines that reacted to light, translucent tendrils that stiffened when exposed to sun. Logan realized they could use them to build tension bridges between trees. With the help of a few willing Tharkians, who admired structure more than sentiment, they began stretching cables across to nearby trunks. Each connection opened new space, new angles, new possibilities. Logan had started calling the growing network the Sky Haven. It wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was becoming a small village suspended above chaos. Every branch creaked and groaned, yet somehow the sound felt alive, like breathing. The vines that formed the foundation kept growing, even after being tied, weaving themselves tighter into the wood. Logan didn't fully understand it, but he saw the results. Where the forest cooperated, the structure strengthened. It was as if the living world had accepted his design. Soon the smell of fresh wood and sap filled the air. Logan had discovered that the resin from certain trees hardened into waterproof coating when mixed with powdered bark. He used it to seal platforms, creating smooth, dry surfaces. The first rain after that was a revelation. Droplets struck the coating and slid off without a trace. For the first time, the group slept without feeling soaked to the bone. The psychological change was immediate. Tension between cadets began to ease. Arguments turned into discussions. Laughter returned, tentative, but real. Below, the ground camp had become a graveyard of failed attempts. The few who refused to climb remained in isolation, covered in mud, watching in silence as the others rose above. Logan didn't blame them. Some species were too heavy for climbing, others too anxious about heights. But even those who stayed below began to depend on the treehouse indirectly, using its elevated platforms as dry storage or for emergency refuge when floods swept through. The instructor's drones recorded everything from above, observing how one human's defiance had turned into the class's collective salvation. By the seventh day, the treehouse had 3 tiers: the lower platforms for supplies and tools, the middle for rest, and the upper for lookout and ventilation. Logan carved grooves in the bark for collecting rainwater and funneled it through hollow vines into a sealed basin he had built from scrap metal. Surreal helped him hang small heat coils underneath, warming the water. The first time she tested it, warm droplets poured over her hands and she looked at him in disbelief. "It's a shower?" she asked. Logan smiled and nodded. "Sort of. Rain-powered. Efficient enough." For a few seconds, she stood motionless, letting the water run down her face. The forest light glimmered on her feathers, and she laughed for the first time since arriving. Word spread fast. The idea of warm rain sounded impossible to most of the cadets, but curiosity overcame hesitation. Soon, more pairs of hands joined the work. The Tharkians helped with structure, their claws perfect for cutting vines cleanly. The Avrians added light-sensitive fibers that glowed faintly in the dark, giving the platforms a natural luminescence. Even the insectoid cadets, who had avoided contact at first, contributed by finding resin-producing plants that strengthened joints. Logan never gave orders, but everyone instinctively followed his rhythm. His quiet confidence carried through every movement. When someone struggled, he stepped in silently, demonstrating rather than explaining. His leadership wasn't declared, it was earned through patience. At night, the canopy transformed. The glowing vines cast soft light across the platforms, making the structure appear as if it were floating among stars. The rain sounded different here, distant, filtered through layers of leaves. The air smelled of resin and roasted seed, a scent that felt strangely comforting. Logan would sit at the edge of the highest platform, legs dangling over the abyss, watching lightning dance far away. He thought of Earth then, of tall forests in Oregon, of wooden cabins hidden in fog, of fire crackling under shelter. The memory didn't make him homesick anymore. It reminded him that he carried home wherever he built it. As the days went by, the Sky Haven evolved into something beyond utility. It became art. Platforms curved naturally around the trunks, the vines forming patterns like veins of light. Water channels glittered under the glow, carrying filtered rain into small reservoirs. The cadets began decorating their spaces, carving symbols, hanging trinkets made from bone or metal scraps. Every addition reflected a piece of identity. Logan encouraged it. "If we're going to survive here," he told them, "we might as well live while we do it." One evening, a severe storm hit. The wind howled through the treetops, bending branches and shaking the platforms. Below, thunder shattered the air, and the jungle screamed with the voices of unseen creatures. The cadets held their breath, expecting everything to collapse, but the Sky Haven swayed instead of breaking. The vines flexed and absorbed the pressure, distributing the force through the structure like muscle fibers. The trees themselves supported the movement, shifting with the wind instead of resisting it. When the storm passed, the camp remained intact. Some cried in relief, others simply stared in awe. Logan only exhaled and whispered, "She passed the test." The instructors observing from orbit recorded a note in their log. "Unexpected adaptation. Human-led team displays superior cooperative architecture, structural resilience beyond simulation projections." But the cadets didn't know that. For them, this was no test anymore. It was life. In the following days, the upper platforms were expanded into common areas. Logan built a cooking space, not a fire, which would have been dangerous, but a small heat array powered by scavenged battery cells. Surreal helped him design vents that channeled smoke and steam upward. The smell of roasted seeds and boiled roots began to drift through the canopy, luring others upward. Soon, mealtime became communal. Cadets gathered on the middle tier, sharing stories from their worlds, trading flavors and techniques. The Tharkians introduced dried insect paste. The Avrians mixed it with local herbs. Logan brewed what he called jungle coffee, a bitter concoction that kept everyone awake through night shifts. The Sky Haven had become a civilization in miniature. Sorrel often watched Logan as he worked. She admired how he never rushed, how every knot, every cut, every adjustment seemed deliberate. One evening, she asked, "Why are you doing this? It's more than survival now. It's creation." He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because surviving isn't enough. We forget that comfort is strength too. A calm mind lasts longer than a desperate one." His words stayed with her. She realized that was what made humans different. Not strength, not intellect, but the relentless urge to build beauty in the middle of chaos. By the 10th day, the Sky Haven had grown into a network of 15 interconnected platforms. Rope bridges swayed gently between trees, lined with glowing vines. Showers dripped warm water. Hammocks hung dry and soft. Filtered rain pooled in clean basins. The ground below had become irrelevant. The forest had accepted them as part of itself. When Logan looked out across the canopy, he no longer saw a battlefield of survival. He saw something else, a new beginning, carved not by dominance, but by harmony. As night fell again, the rain returned, soft and steady. Logan lay in his hammock, listening to the faint conversations echoing through the canopy. Laughter mixed with rain, and somewhere below, the last few cadets still on the ground were preparing to climb. The human closed his eyes, feeling the sway of the branches. The Sky Haven was alive now, and so was he. For the first time, he understood that this world hadn't been trying to destroy them. It had been testing whether they could learn to belong. The first sunrise that broke after the great storm changed something profound in the air. The light no longer looked pale and frightened behind clouds. It spread through the canopy in warm streaks of gold and green, touching every leaf with a soft glow. The rain had paused, leaving droplets suspended on the vines like strings of glass beads. The Sky Haven smelled of wet wood and heated resin. Logan Reed woke before anyone else, his eyes opening to the quiet pulse of the forest. For the first time in days, the jungle wasn't groaning or cracking under the weight of wind. It was breathing slowly, peacefully, like a creature that had accepted their presence. He climbed down from his hammock and stood barefoot on the smooth surface of the platform. The air felt clean, heavy with moisture but gentle against his skin. He looked around at the structure, the bridges swaying lightly, the leaves glimmering in the light, the makeshift showers dripping faintly from collected rainwater. Everything was alive and awake, and for a moment he forgot he was part of a survival trial. It felt like he was home again, not on Earth, but in some place that understood what it meant to start over. He knelt beside the small cooking area he had built from the fragments of metal and heat coils. The coils still hummed faintly, powered by salvaged battery cells. He added a few drops of water from the reservoir into a metal pot and watched as steam began to rise. The memory of early mornings back home came to him. The scent of roasted coffee beans, his father's quiet humming, the small rituals that had made the chaos of life bearable. On Araris 3, there were no beans, no civilization, no kitchen, but there were roots, seeds, and sap. He had discovered a kind of seed that hardened when roasted and gave off an earthy, slightly bitter aroma. He had been saving it for days, and now seemed like the right moment to try something new. He poured the ground seeds into the boiling water. The mixture frothed slightly, releasing a smell that startled him. Warm, familiar, grounding. He smiled to himself. It wasn't coffee, not exactly, but it was close enough. The sound of gentle footsteps behind him made him turn. Surreal appeared from her hammock, stretching her wings carefully. Her feathers shimmered faintly in the light. "You're awake early," she said softly. He nodded. Couldn't sleep. Too quiet. She looked at the steaming pot, her head tilting curiously. "What are you making?" He handed her a small cup carved from hardened bark and poured a bit of the drink inside. "Something my people call coffee, or at least the closest thing I can make here." She lifted the cup, inhaled, and blinked. "It smells strange. Bitter." He grinned faintly. "It tastes worse, but it makes mornings better." She hesitated but took a sip. Her reaction was immediate, a mix of confusion and delight. "It burns, but it wakes me up." "Exactly," he said. "It means you're alive." The scent drifted across the platforms, carried by the damp morning air. One by one, others began to stir. The Tharkian engineer climbed down from the upper platform, rubbing his eyes, muttering something about the smell. The insectoid cadet peeked from behind a cluster of vines, antennae twitching. Soon more faces appeared, tired but curious. Logan gestured for them to come closer. "Morning meeting," he said casually. "No rules, no orders, just warmth." He poured small portions of the drink into whatever containers he could find. Metal lids, broken cups, even a hollowed piece of fruit. The aliens accepted them hesitantly, sniffing, tasting, reacting in their own ways. For some, the bitterness was too strong. For others, the warmth was enough to bring a faint smile. It wasn't about the drink itself. It was the ritual, the idea of starting the day with something shared, something human. The rain resumed shortly after, soft and rhythmic. But now, instead of retreating or cursing, the cadets stayed where they were, sheltered under leaves, drinking in silence. Steam rose around them, blending with the mist. Sorel watched the others, her expression unreadable for a moment before she said quietly, "You made them forget they're being tested." Logan looked at her, surprised. She was right. The tension that had once ruled the group had vanished. The morning ritual had become an anchor, something simple that reminded them of peace. Later that day, the Sky Haven buzzed with movement. The Tharkians reinforced the bridges with extra supports. The Avrians installed new channels for collecting cleaner rainwater, and even the quiet insectoid cadets began constructing wind traps to dry materials faster. The forest echoed with conversation, laughter, arguments, collaboration. What had been a collection of desperate individuals had become a functioning community. Logan didn't issue commands, but everyone somehow worked around him. His quiet competence had become the rhythm of the place. As the afternoon progressed, the sun broke through again, spreading warmth across the canopy. Steam lifted from the wet leaves, turning the air golden. Logan sat near the edge of a platform holding his cup, watching as Surreal adjusted the vines for balance. He admired her precision, every motion calculated, graceful. When she noticed his gaze, she smirked. "You think your human design is the reason this works," she teased. "But it's the forest that allows it." He nodded. "I know. We just learned to listen." That evening, as the rain returned with force, the group gathered under the largest platform. The warm rain from the showers fell in fine streams, creating a soft curtain of water around them. It was no longer a symbol of misery, but of renewal. Logan handed out freshly brewed cups again, this time adding a pinch of crushed root for flavor. The Tharkian took a sip and grunted approvingly. "Almost tastes civilized," he said. The group laughed, and even Sorrel couldn't hide her amusement. As they drank, the conversation turned to stories. Each cadet shared fragments of their home worlds, tales of frozen oceans, crystal deserts, metallic skies. Logan listened, fascinated. When it came to his turn, he spoke quietly about Earth, about rainstorms that washed the streets clean, about coffee shops glowing in the morning fog, about sitting with strangers and feeling connected without words. His voice softened when he described the scent of wet soil after summer storms, and even the most stoic cadets listened in silence. For many of them, it was the first time they imagined rain as something beautiful. As the night deepened, the glow from the vines illuminated the faces around him. The rain outside continued, steady and soothing. Logan looked around at the circle of cadets, at their tired but peaceful expressions, and felt something inside him shift. The survival trial had become more than endurance. It was now about understanding. The galaxy had always viewed humans as chaotic, impulsive, unpredictable. But here, surrounded by alien species, one simple ritual of warmth and shared comfort had united them in a way no rulebook could. Sorrel watched him quietly. She could see the weight in his eyes, the mix of pride and exhaustion, of responsibility he had never asked for but carried naturally. She leaned closer and said softly, "When the instructors come, they'll see what you built, but they won't understand it." He looked at her with a faint smile. "They don't need to. This wasn't built for them." The rain intensified again, roaring against the leaves. Logan stood, holding his cup high. "To warmth in the storm," he said. The others repeated it, their voices blending into the sound of rain. It became a chant, simple and human, echoing through the canopy. By the time the night ended, the forest glowed with soft light and laughter. The air smelled of roasted seeds, steam, and wet wood. The rain, once the enemy, had become part of the rhythm of life. The Sky Haven stood firm, its roots intertwined with the trees, its people bound by something greater than survival. As dawn approached, Logan stayed awake, sitting on the edge of the highest platform. The forest stretched endlessly below, alive with sound and light. He could see the faint shimmer of drones above, silently watching. He didn't care. What mattered wasn't the report or the score. It was the fact that, in a place designed to break them, he had taught others to find peace. The first rays of the new morning pierced the clouds, casting warm light across his face. He took one last sip of his improvised coffee, closed his eyes, and smiled. The rain fell gently again, not as punishment, but as blessing. When the instructor's ship pierced the clouds, the forest below shimmered in pale light. The metallic hum of its engines rolled across the canopy, startling flocks of translucent birds that burst upward like glass fragments. From orbit, the planet looked the same as it always had, a thick green mass wrapped in clouds and endless rain. Yet when the sensors focused on the coordinates of the cadet camp, the readings were unexpected. Instead of heat signatures scattered in the mud, the scanners displayed elevated structures, vertical temperature patterns, and organized energy sources. The instructors exchanged glances. "That can't be right," one muttered. "No group has lasted more than 8 days here without external shelter." The lead instructor frowned. "Then let's see what this one did." The ship descended, slicing through mist and storm. Down below, the Sky Haven was alive with motion. The cadets had grown accustomed to the planet's rhythms, the steady rainfall, the daily glow of the vines, the comforting smell of brewed seed every morning. When the thunder of engines broke the natural silence, heads turned upward. Logan Reed was sitting near the edge of the highest platform, watching the rain slide down the curved leaves. He heard the deep mechanical sound and exhaled slowly. "They're back," he said quietly. Sorrel joined him, her wings folded tightly against her back. "Do you think they'll understand what we built?" she asked. He gave a faint smile. "Probably not, but they'll see it." The ship landed awkwardly on the wet ground below, the mud sucking at its landing pads. The instructors emerged in full gear, expecting the usual chaos, destroyed tents, half-starved cadets, and the inevitable arguments over blame. What greeted them instead was a sight none of them had ever seen. The camp on the ground was empty. No broken shelters, no scattered equipment. Only a few vines and drainage channels marked where the old landing zone had been. One instructor checked his scanner again. "Where are they?" Another pointed upward. Through the dense canopy, faint lights flickered, steady, organized, deliberate. "Above," he said quietly. The first instructor craned his neck, astonishment breaking his usual stoicism. "You're telling me they built that?" he whispered. The glow from the platforms reflected in his visor. "With no external assistance?" "It's structurally impossible," another protested, but even as he spoke, the evidence contradicted him. The platforms were woven seamlessly into the trees, glowing vines connecting them like nerves in a living organism. Water channeled from the leaves into reservoirs, and the faint hum of warmth suggested heat systems functioning without fuel. It was less a shelter and more a living city above the forest floor. Logan appeared at the edge of the main platform, his boots slick from the rain, his posture calm. He looked down at the instructors and raised a hand in greeting. "Welcome to the Sky Haven," he called out. His voice carried clearly through the trees. One instructor barked an order for a ladder drone, and moments later a metallic disc ascended, lifting them upward through layers of mist until they emerged into a world that seemed entirely separate from the planet below. The moment they stepped onto the platform, they froze. The structure didn't shake or creak. It was solid, alive, humming faintly beneath their feet. The air smelled clean, fresh, touched by the aroma of roasted seeds and rainwater. Around them, cadets of all species moved with practiced ease, some adjusting ropes, others cleaning basins or gathering materials. There was no panic, no disorder. Every face that turned toward the instructors looked steady, calm, and alive. One instructor took off his helmet slowly, as if afraid to break the illusion. "How did you—" he began, but his words faded as he looked around. Surreal approached, her feathers glistening in the filtered sunlight. "We adapted," she said simply. "The human taught us how." She nodded toward Logan, who was checking the vines near one of the bridges. The lead instructor followed her gaze. "Cadet Reed," he said sharply. "Explain." Logan wiped his hands on his trousers and turned to face them. His tone was respectful, but there was no trace of the nervousness he had shown on the first day of the mission. "There wasn't much to explain," he said. "The ground wasn't safe, so we built up. The forest gives everything we need if you treat it like part of the structure instead of the enemy." One instructor crouched to examine the vines, running his gloved fingers over them. "These are alive," he murmured. Logan nodded. "They grow tighter with tension. We grafted them into the trees so the structure strengthens naturally. The leaves collect rainwater and the resin seals the platforms. The trees protect us. We just had to listen." The instructor shook his head slowly. "You created an ecosystem out of your camp." Logan smiled faintly. "I didn't create it. I just helped it notice us." The instructors spent hours inspecting every detail. They tested the stability of the bridges, checked the energy readings from the heating coils, analyzed the purity of the filtered water. Everything exceeded expectations. The report tablet filled with notes. Self-sustaining design. No external supply use. Social cohesion at 98%. One instructor whispered to another, "No group in Academy history has scored like this." Yet what impressed them most wasn't the structure itself. It was the people. The cadets who had once belonged to rival species now worked together like a single organism. There was laughter, conversation, and harmony. The planet had tested them with endless storms, and they had answered by building peace. When evening came, the rain returned in fine sheets. The instructors prepared to leave, satisfied that the trial had been more than passed. But before they descended, the lead instructor turned to Logan. "You understand this will change the curriculum," he said. "We designed these environments to test endurance, not domestic engineering." Logan shrugged lightly. "Endurance without purpose breaks people. You wanted survival. We built life." The instructor's expression softened, though he tried to hide it. "You've redefined the parameters, Cadet Reed." "Good," Logan said. That was the point. Before they left, the instructor stayed for one of the evening rituals. The cadets gathered under the main canopy as Logan poured the familiar dark drink into carved cups. The smell filled the air, warm and earthy. The instructors hesitated at first, but eventually accepted the offering. "It's bitter," one said after sipping. Logan nodded. "It's supposed to be." The others laughed quietly, though they didn't understand why. As the rain intensified, the cadets raised their cups together. "To warmth in the storm," they said in unison. The instructors looked around, seeing something rare, unity born not from command but from choice. The next morning, the ship rose again, disappearing into the clouds. The instructor's report was already being transmitted to the Galactic Academy. Team survived full duration with 0 casualties, constructed multi-tiered arboreal habitat, demonstrated advanced adaptation, cooperation, and environmental integration. Recommendation: new study module, human comfort survival model. When the ship vanished, silence returned to the forest. Logan stood on the upper platform watching the trail of light fade into the gray sky. Sorrel joined him, leaning against the railing. "So that's it?" she asked softly. "The test is over?" He nodded. "For them, maybe. For us, it's just another morning." She smiled, her feathers catching the light. "You don't miss the ground anymore?" "No," he said quietly. "Up here, everything feels right." He moved to the edge of the platform and looked down. The world below was a blur of green and silver, endless rain feeding endless life. The sky haven swayed gently in the wind, the vines humming faintly under the weight of the storm. He listened to the rhythm, the sound of droplets striking leaves, the whisper of ropes, the laughter of cadets sharing breakfast. It was all one heartbeat, and for the first time he felt that the universe itself had joined the rhythm. That night, as darkness fell, the sky haven glowed like a constellation suspended between earth and sky. Logan sat with Surreal beside the warm basin of filtered water, the smell of roasted seed filling the air. "You realize what you did," she said. "You made this place feel alive." He looked at her with a small, tired smile. "It always was. We just had to stop fighting it." The rain began again, soft and steady, wrapping the world in silver mist. The platform swayed, the lights pulsed gently, and somewhere deep in the jungle, the wind carried the faint echo of human laughter. The Galactic Academy would remember Ilaris 3 as the first world where survival became civilization. For the cadets who lived through it, the test became legend, the story of a human who built warmth from rain, comfort from chaos, and community from despair. But for Logan Reed, it was simpler than that. He didn't see himself as a hero or a pioneer. He saw only the truth his father had once told him, that the measure of strength isn't in how long you endure the storm, but in how beautifully you live inside it. As dawn rose again, gold light filtered through the canopy, glimmering off the wet leaves. The forest breathed, the sky haven swayed, and Logan took one last sip of his morning coffee. He closed his eyes, listening to the sound of rain, and smiled, not because the trial was over, but because, at last, it felt like home.